Okay, miskien net voor ons begin, kan jy net vir ons die naam sê en so, en dan kan ons begin waar jy vandaan kom en so.
I'm not very comfortable before the cameras, but anyway, let's
Ag,
do
dit
our
sal
best.
vinnig lekker raak.
Do you want me to do it in English or in Afrikaans?
Let's do in English, ja.
No problem. My name is Andrew Lefleur. I'm currently a magistrate here in the Worcester District Court. I've been staying here for the last 26 years. I'm married. I have 4 kids. I have 2 at university. And basically I'm the breadwinner of the family.
And where are you from originally?
Originally, I was born in Cape Town, can you believe it, in Elsies River. We moved to the Southern Cape when I was about 4 years old. And then we went to live on a little place called Kranshoek, which was at that stage a Griqua settlement. Coming from the Griqua ethnic group myself, we moved down there to be with our own people, and that's...
So where do your parents and your grandparents come from?
Well, the whole story of the Griqua nation, of course, then comes into play, because what happened is in 1776, the governor, Cape Governor Swellen Grebel, emancipated some of his slaves, and one of those slaves was Adam Kok. And Adam Kok then moved to Piketberg, where he basically set up camp, and a lot of the people around the place started moving into the camp, and they started building quite a big community there. And that later became the Griqua community. They then from there moved to Klaarwater because the place became just too small. There was not enough water for the animals and so on. And then they moved up to Klaarwater, which would be now in the Griqualand West region. And from there to Philippolis and all those places, until diamonds, of course, was discovered. And that meant that government basically took over the land that was annexed. They then were offered a place in Natal called Niemandsland. And in 1862, they took all the oxes and wagons and mummies and daddies and everyone, and they moved over the Drakensberg Mountains to Griqualand East, Niemandsland, where Kokstad was then established. Because the English then took over Natal in the late 1800s, once again there was an annexation of that region. And you must understand that the Griqua people at that stage had their own government, they even had their own money system, they had their own laws that they applied. And because of the white trek boere, the white farmers that started moving into that area, conflict arose because the white people would not submit themselves to the laws of a Griqua chief, as you can understand, politics at that time. But in any case, when the English rulers then took over Natal and took over basically what was known as Griqualand East, the last of the Kok's sons was shot dead because of a conflict that arose. And then the only heir that was left was on the feminine side, Rachel Susanna Kok. And Rachel Susanna Kok then married my great-great-grandfather. And that is why the Lefleurs and the Koks took over basically the empire, if you want to call it that of the Griqua community. In 1898, that great-great-grandfather of mine was sent to jail for 14 years for sedition and basically
by whom?
By the English rulers at the time.
Okay.
Basically for coming in. Well, he was accused of organizing an uprising against the English Empire. He stayed in jail for about 3.5 years, and then he was released in some kind of deal that was made. Originally, he was offered to just leave the country and to go to Rhodesia when they will make him a governor, as long as he doesn't organize the Pondos and the Zulus and the Griqua people against the white or the English regime at the time, which he refused. He was then bluntly placed under a banning order. He couldn't leave the magisterial district of Cape Town, Wynberg, although many times he slipped through, went to Kokstad, went to Griqualand East, and a couple of times he was arrested. There's a reported case, Rex versus Lefleur, you can go and read it up, where he had to defend himself because they said that he needed a pass to go into certain areas. And his contention was no, but because of his race, he didn't need a pass. And actually, he was excluded from the categories of people who needed passes. In any case, in the time that he had to stay in Cape Town, he started organizing what is known as the Griqualand National Conference. Now, the Griqualand National Conference was basically, first of all, it was a women's group because he was banned from being with gentlemen at the time because obviously he would be organizing a rally or an uprising of some sort again. But the Griqualand National Conference was basically, as far as I know, the oldest, and not the ANC, the oldest liberation movement in this country. It was established in 1903, 1904. And from there on, he tried various projects to get people to be what they call self-help schemers, to help themselves basically. Many of these schemes actually failed because there was no government support. It was torrid and dry land that they used for farming purposes and so on.
Yeah.
They had a couple of mining experiments, but they couldn't get land at the time. They even tried some fishing and so on. In the end, they ended up in the Southern Cape, the Plettenberg Bay area, at a place known as Kranshoek. That is where they basically established a Griquas settlement. And that is, with this long story that I'm telling you, why we went there in the end, because we thought that this would be like a Griqua homeland sort of settlement where you can live in peace.
Tell me now about the Griquas, just some background about them, because many people are peripherally familiar with the Griquas and so forth and not intimately familiar with them. You know, I think in a popular sense, when you think of South Africa, you think of the dominant black groupings like the Xhosa, the Zulu, Sotho, Tswana, Sesotho, Venda, and so forth. And then you think of the Sun people with Nama and so forth and all the variations. And of course, then you think of the Indians and whites, and the whites splitting in more than one group, of course. Now the Griqua in the midst, where do they draw their lineages from? You
missed one very important group, and that is what is referred to as the Khoi group.
Yeah, but the Khoi, I mean, would you separate them from the Sun?
Because yes, most definitely.
Because
the Sun people mostly referred to what was known as the Bushmen. The Busman.
Yeah, I saw Khoi and Khoi. You sometimes even hear Khoi Sun.
You see, that's a totally wrong term that they use.
That's good to raise that then. Okay, tell us about it.
Because the Khoi people are basically the First Nation people of this country.
Okay.
And I mean, you can go and you can do all the research about that. It's just a fact.
Okay.
That all the black races moved down to the southern part of Africa only at a later stage.
Yeah.
And when they came here, they found the Khoi people here.
Sure.
The Bushmen, on the other hand, were more up there in the Kalahari district in Botswana, where you still find
but also Lesotho.
Lesotho, you still find them there. But in the most southern part of this country, the Aboriginal people that was found here was the Khoi people. And the Griquas is just one of those tribes belonging to the Khoi group.
So did you have a language that now does not exist
anymore? Oh yes. Many of these tribes had their own language, so there was different languages. There was not one Khoi language as such. But because of all that happened, you know, you had colonization, you had the empire here, you had apartheid, and now we have democracy. Obviously, there was genocide, as far as I'm concerned, regarding not only the people, but also regarding their languages, their traditions, and customs, and everything else.
So what would, in a future South Africa, what would you feel would a more ideal or an ideal freedom look like from your vantage point?
Perhaps I should put that in perspective since 1990, well, before 1994, when the whole negotiations between the National Party and the ANC started. We actually asked to be part of that negotiation setup so that we could negotiate some position for ourselves. I mean, being the Aboriginal people of this country, we thought that we had a case that we could put to the parties. They ignored it completely. After that, in 1995, when Mr. Mandela became the president in 1994, not even a year after he became the president, he actually extended a hand of friendship and a hand of wanting to talk to us. And I actually visited him with a group of Griqua people, and we had a sat down and we had a talk about this. And since then, we've started negotiations. We started real constitutional accommodation negotiations with government, and we are still in the process of doing so. Now, the one positive thing that happened is last year a bill was published whereby they intend to include the Khoi people and the San people as part of the House of Traditional Leaders. Of course, up to last year, before this bill was published, no one would recognize that we are actually indeed also in a situation where we can be regarded as traditional societies or traditional communities with traditional leaders as such. And we are working towards that. Now, what that would mean is that, you know, we never wanted to get involved in politics as such, because you know the mess that politics causes. But when you're in a house of traditional leaders, at least you have a foot to stand on to get you to liaise with ministers and departments and whatever, to try and get whatever is needed in your traditional Griqua communities. One of the things that I'm absolutely stunned about is that we are still struggling to get like bursaries for our children. Just to have our children to go to university or colleges or whatever. There's just nothing available. And if there is available, you're not black enough to get bursaries, unfortunately. And that's the truth. That's what they tell you. And that's the type of thing that I firmly believe in. If we can start getting our children to be educated, give them a tertiary education, then you start building a middle class in this country. And if you start building a middle class, a big, strong middle class, you start building up the economy. Because those are the people who will go and buy cars, they'll go and buy houses, they'll go and buy all these luxury items. And then you start building the economy. The guy who has the shop at the corner, he's going to have business. And he can send his kids to college again because there's business coming in. If you have what you have today, it's an unsustainable situation where you have 13.5 million people on social grants and you only have 5 million taxpayers in this country. That's not sustainable. That's not sustainable. And I mean, it's just logic. It's just logic. Don't tell me this is wrong. Build your middle class and you build a strong society. The 2% or 1% at the top, those are the people who are the millionaires. We're never going to get there. Never ever. But in the middle, you have these people who can supply government with taxes so that they can at least then provide for the lower class is the wrong word, the poverty classes that really can't get up there. And you know, you're always going to have people that have some kind of disability who's never ever going to be able to have a university degree or whatever. And government need to provide for them. But you can only do that if you strengthen and broaden your middle class to such an extent that the income from their taxes can actually support the smaller part of the community who can't provide for themselves. So that's where we want to be.
That's a very, very, very blunt statement.
Very blunt.
That
I hope you guys in America can see this. Huh?
Yeah, if you look at the numbers you throw out there, it's alarming.
It's alarming. It's alarming.
Yeah.
Our government can't understand that you can't have 5 million people supporting 12.5 or 13.5 million people. It's a misnomer. You don't have even to think about it. In any case, that's the society I think one should be building. The biggest problem at this stage is the economic disparity we have. We can say whatever we want about apartheid and whatever, that's gone. That's over and done with. What we need now is to support people up to the situation where they can start providing for themselves.
A final question to you. My perception, and that I've, as I visited with others, was that under Mandela, the concept was to build a rainbow nation, to have a non-racial democracy. Those words were heard often, and that was really the aspiration. Do you feel that's still the case?
I think the whole rainbow nation thing was a myth. It was a myth because you can't have people divided for 300 years and then in 5 years' time put them all together in one box and say, now you are a rainbow nation. That's just not on. I don't believe it for 1 minute. The divisions, and especially the social divisions within our communities, is still too big, too large, sometimes totally unassailable. It's not something that you can just patch up by saying we are a rainbow nation and all that nonsense. I don't believe it for 1 minute. What is needed, and the only way you can have true reconciliation, is to make sure that those classes of people who are in the lower economic spheres of our communities are brought up to a situation where they feel dignified. They have water, they have sanitation, they have houses, they don't stay in shacks anymore. The children don't get tutored under trees anymore. Now you tell me there's a rainbow nation if we have a brilliant standard of school in the Model C schools, and those children need to sit on the floor or need to sit under a tree to be educated.
Yeah.
There's nothing such as a rainbow nation. I don't believe it for 1 minute. Nowhere in the world does that exist. Of course we try to be one nation. Of course we try to be the South African nation. But a rainbow, not in my lifetime. Of course we're trying. Don't get me wrong, I'm not negative about this. If we stop trying, that should be the end of this country. But if we keep on trying, and we're busy with the process here, building bridges between communities and getting people involved and trying to help the poor and trying to help the elderly and trying to help the disabled people.
Yeah.
This is a very caring community, actually.
Yeah.
And we are in a process of building that kind of relationship with people. But it's a very, very long and arduous and laborious process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight.
Do you feel the concept of non-racialism is viable?
No. We have had races since the inception of the human race. There's been different races. And you see this everywhere, that there's still a division regarding race. And I'm not talking about the class division, I'm not talking about economic classes, I'm talking about race. If you look around you, where you sit right now, you still have Zwelitemba on the one side, which is the black township. You still have Johnson's Park, where I stay, which is a colored township. And then you have the beautiful Panorama, Langerich, Fairy Glen, the white townships. And you tell me there's no such thing as racism. There's a racial divide. And it's caused, of course, it's been caused by many factors in the past. The fact of the matter is we still have physical divisions regarding where people stay, where their children go to school, even where they get buried when they die. That's how deeply entrenched racism is still in this country. And we're not bitter about it. We understand the situation has come along for such a long time that it's just it's not logical to be able to change it in 20 years' time. It's
Yeah.
not logical. What I think they should do, and this is the problem that I have with government at this stage, is the infighting and the power hunger and corruption and whatever is going on. They're not concentrating on what is actually necessary to bring this country together and to provide for those who cannot provide for themselves.
Do you have hope that that will change?
All depends on leadership. All depends on leadership. If you have strong leadership who are committed to making a change in people's lives, of course it can change. But if you stay on this path of people trying to have their own agendas put forward, power hunger, money hunger, all those things, then I don't think we're going to achieve that. Not in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Not in my lifetime.
Well, thank you very much for your very insightful comments and giving us a broad perspective. It's specifically interesting because of your heritage and the environment in which you see, and your perspective is very unique and fresh and very valuable.
Thank you very much.